Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. In response to Trump's auto tariffs, Carney cancels campaigning, returns to Ottawa for meeting of the Canada-U.S. relations. Plus, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith facing more criticism for getting chummy with Americans, this time as she heads back to Florida for Ben Shapiro's podcast. And NDP MLA Kathleen Ganley stops by the BCN studios to chat about issues concerning Alberta's opposition.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. After 4 days on the campaign trail, Liberal leader Mark Carney stopped campaigning to head to Ottawa to call a meeting of the Canada-U.S. Cabinet Committee. They met to discuss U.S. President Donald Trump's automotive tariffs. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne told reporters Thursday he wants workers to know, quote, "We have your back," while making sure the government builds a made-in-Canada supply chain. Trump's 25% tariffs on all automobile imports to the U.S. start next week, and the president has since threatened Canada and the European Union with even stiffer tariffs if they work together to do economic harm to America.
Last night, the President of the United States reached out to schedule a call. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how we can protect our workers and build our economies. I will make clear to the President that those interests are best served by cooperation and mutual respect, including of our sovereignty. We will fight the U.S. tariffs with retaliatory trade actions of our own that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impacts here in Canada. We will protect our workers and our industries during this difficult period. But above all, we will build a new Canadian economy. We will build Canada strong.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's going to, quote, inflict pain on Americans after Donald Trump announced his move to impose 25% tariffs on automobile imports into the country.
We're going to make sure that we inflict as much pain as possible to the American people without inflicting pain on the Canadian population. And that's the reason we've done 2 rounds of 30 billion and 30 billion. And the last 65 billion, it will hurt. I'll be very, very frank, but I've talked to a tremendous amount of people going to events, and I'm very transparent by saying we have 2 options here. We either roll over as a country and he runs us over 15 times and gets what he wants, or we feel a little bit of pain and we fight like we've never fought before.
As U.S. tariffs make their mark on Canada's economy, provinces are now counting the costs of interprovincial trade barriers. Trevor Toome, economics professor at the University of Calgary and director of fiscal and economic policy with the School of Public Policy, says billions of dollars could be added to our economy if trade barriers between provinces were removed.
Roughly speaking, the internal trade costs add somewhere between 5 to 15% to prices. And so think about that as multiples of the GST, but it's hidden and embedded within the price of the items that we purchase. And the economic benefits of eliminating these barriers can also be quite substantial, potentially as high as 8% added to the overall productivity of the Canadian economy. And so that's quite a bit. 8% might sound small, but that's 8% of a $3.1 trillion economy. And so what we're really talking about here is potentially $250 billion per year in economic activity if we were to have fully liberalized interprovincial trade in Canada.
Catch the full interview with Trevor Toome from the School of Public Policy and BCN's Naveen Day coming up after Business News. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was in Florida once again today and once again faced criticism for it. This time it's to pay a visit to right-wing podcaster Ben Shapiro and go on his show. She says she's doing this to appeal to a Republican audience to see if they can help convince President Trump to be more lenient on the tariffs. Smith told the legislature Wednesday that she is being unjustly criticized for heading south to try to diffuse an escalating trade war.
They want this lady and Alberta to just sit down and shut up. Well, here's my response to that. I will not be silent. Alberta will not be silent. We will not be pushed around and called traitors for merely having the courage to actually do something about our nation's and province's predicament other than merely indulging in self-righteous tantrums. And I, for one, will never be silenced by the party in Ottawa that has sold out our beloved province for the last 10 years with the help of their NDP collaborators. I have and I always will put Albertans first. And until this danger to Alberta and our economy is passed, they're going to have to roll me off in a stretcher before I will stop fighting for our province and our people. So they can call me and my caucus whatever name in the dictionary they want. As long as Albertans know that we are fighting for them and their families, we could care less what the members opposite or Liberal politicians in Ottawa have to say about us, because Albertans expect their premier and government to always put Albertans first and lead them through this storm with fearless determination. Our government's advocacy has made a massive difference for Albertans and for Canadians, and that is a fact. But now we have another tariff deadline looming on April the 2nd, and I am now off to the U.S. yet again to try and speak to Americans, this time through the second largest podcaster in the world, whose audience is made up of exactly the people we need to persuade to convince their president to change course on tariffs against Canada. And what does Team Carney want me to do? They want me to abandon my post, remain in Alberta, and do absolutely nothing to defend our province.
Smith's criticizers from Alberta's opposition and beyond say she is being far too chummy with far-right influencers who wish to do Canada harm. For his part, Ben Shapiro is criticized by the left for mocking Canada as a silly country and has amused it could become the 51st state. But according to Smith, he has a wide circle of influence that could help change the minds of Trump administration officials on tariffs. Smith also plans to attend a fundraiser with Shapiro while in Florida. NDP MLA for Calgary Mountain View, Kathleen Ganley, was in Lethbridge and stopped by our studios today to sit down with Naveen Day. They discussed a number of topics, including her thoughts on Smith's Florida visit.
Let's talk more about Premier Smith's trip to the States. She's going on Ben Shapiro's show. So let me hear your thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts are, so she's not even going on his show. She's going to participate in a fundraiser for him. So, her claim is that she's going down there, to somehow advocate for Alberta, but that's not what she's doing at all. She's going down there to help a right-wing extremist, a known racist, someone who has said that our country, our whole country of Canada, should be annexed and should become essentially a colony of the United States. She's going down to help him fundraise. So that's really, really troubling. And she's spending taxpayer money to do that. I don't think that the average Albertan would agree with that.
You can catch more of that interview on our Friday evening newscast. In other news, Winnipeg police confirmed Ashley Shingoose, a 30-year-old from St. Teresa Point, Anisininu Nation, was the fourth victim of convicted serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky in 2022. Until yesterday, she was unidentified, known only as Buffalo Woman, but was believed to be one of the four murdered First Nations women. Skibitsky was sentenced to life in prison last year. The Manitoba government has promised Ashley's family that there will be a search of the city-run landfill where her remains are believed to be.
I can tell you that from the time of Mr. Skibitsky's initial arrest on May 17th, 2022, until as recently as this week, we have never stopped in our efforts to identify Buffalo Woman. On December 17th, 2024, homicide detectives conducted a post-conviction interview with Mr. Skibitsky at a maximum security facility where he is serving his sentences. During this interview, new information was provided to investigators that established that the remains of Buffalo Woman, as she was known at the time of this interview, were taken to the Brady landfill in March of 2022.
I want to say to Ashley's parents, to her mom and dad, who I had a chance to speak with briefly yesterday, I promise you that we are going to search the Brady landfill for your daughter.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew added that they cannot promise her remains will be found, but they will try. Ashley's father, Albert Shingu, says a landfill is not a burial ground and people are not garbage, and that a successful search would help bring his daughter home. Well, 5 candidates have been confirmed for the race to become Member of Parliament under the Lethbridge riding. Incumbent Conservative Rachel Thomas will attempt to win her 4th straight term, but another local candidate who works as a business broker says she is running to battle government overreach and overtaxation and to provide Canadians with a voice. BCN's Landon Hickok sat down with Clara Peterlow, who is running in Lethbridge for the People's Party of Canada.
So what was the decision that you made that you would enter politics? What do you bring to the table?
Yeah, that's a big question. It was certainly not something that I had ever aspired to do. Going into politics, I always thought politics was a joke, I'll be honest. I didn't want to participate in politics. I was just, like a lot of people feel, like my voice doesn't matter. What's one vote going to do? What impact can I even really have? You know, there's really just only a permanent government in Canada, like left, right, center, it doesn't even matter. It's just the same outcome every time, which I just didn't want anything to do with it. And I think a lot of people probably feel that way, and that it's an untruth. You know, your vote does matter. You do have a voice, and it's important to act out your right as a citizen to vote, because if everybody who didn't vote voted, we would have a very different political climate, a very different political distribution, if you will. So get out there and vote. But no, the real reason why is, honestly, like I've spent years, you know, praying. I pray. I'm an active Christian, and I pray every day, you know, for like the drug epidemic, for God to come and help the drug epidemic so that people could get healthy again, you know, to help the poor, to put food on people's tables, you know. And so after doing that, like for asking God to come and fix all these problems, you know, it's really just come to my full understanding that the way God works is that God works through us.
How important in your perspective is God important in federal politics?
Well, that's a really great question. I mean, I think, you know, Leon Fontaine said, in every area, go greater.
You know.
And I think in federal politics, you know, my goal would be to bring Jesus mapped it all out. It was very simple what Jesus said. He said to, you know, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the people in jail, help people who are sick, you know, house the homeless. Like those are just basic fundamental human needs. And I believe that in the federal government, we could help to get Canada out of poverty. Yeah.
You can watch the full interview on our Bridge City News YouTube page. Alberta is inviting its residents to participate in an online survey to help inform the implementation of steps the province is taking to strengthen food safety in licensed childcare facilities. This is in response to an E. coli outbreak that hit Calgary childcare facilities in the fall of 2023. The province responded by establishing an external review panel, and a final report was published in the summer of 2024. The report outlined 12 main recommendations and 27 sub-recommendations. If implemented, some recommendations may also affect the broader food service industry, including food establishments. Well, Lethbridge's Chief of Police, Shaheen Medizadeh, will have to undergo a misconduct hearing next month. It stems from a 2022 complaint that alleges the chief violated a public health order relating to cohorts during the COVID-19 pandemic by taking a civilian member out to lunch, and that he denied culpability when confronted by the complainant, and that he brought discredit to the Lethbridge Police Service by participating in a news conference about holding LPS employees accountable for violating public health orders when he wasn't following them himself. The original investigation identified 16 allegations, but 10 were either time barred under the Police Act or the complainant did not supply enough evidence. The 6 remaining allegations were dismissed as frivolous, vexatious, and lacking an evidentiary basis. However, after the complainant appealed to the Law Enforcement Review Board, the LERB directed the Lethbridge Police Commission to conduct a hearing on the 3 allegations that we mentioned. The hearing will be held in the Culver Room at Lethbridge City Hall, April 17th at 9:30 a.m. The expansion of the Lethbridge Wellness Shelter and Stabilization Unit continues to move forward. Robin James, CEO of the Lethbridge Housing Authority, says the shelter will expand from 90 to 200 beds in the new space. While the existing shelter will undergo renovations to become a programming space, James says the old shelter will also be used as an additional space in winter by adding mats if needed.
The shelter has been over capacity for quite some time, so we're very fortunate that the minister recognized that and the need for the expansion in Lethbridge and gave us the grant. $4 million we did anticipate was going to be sufficient. However, as we got into the project, we quite quickly realized that it wasn't. We were very fortunate that the Minister of Seniors Community Social Services was able to give us an extra $1 million. This year, their largest number of guests staying in 24 hours was 255. With the stand-up of Recovery Alberta, we're really hoping that we will start to see an impact on those numbers as they address addiction and mental health concerns. The expansion will be up and ready by the end of April, and then the renovations inside the shelter will likely be another 60 or 90 days.
According to Stats Canada, the overall permanent emergency shelter system capacity grew almost 13% between 2022 and 2023. There are many causes of homelessness. Addiction, mental health, and economic issues are the main reasons that lead many people to live on the streets. This Thursday, during a session of the Southern Alberta Council on Public Affairs, or SACPA, Dr. Yael Bellinger, professor of political science at the University of Lethbridge, spoke on a topic titled, "What Story Do We Create About the Homeless?" He explained the importance of the community's perspective on homelessness.
Are important because they influence how we respond politically, the type of policies we put in place, the type of interventions we develop. When we talk about the point in time count and people living a chronic lifestyle, that doesn't take into account the invisible homeless in town. So for every one individual that's living on the street in a chronic condition, we assume that there's roughly 3 other individuals in the city that are living either in transitional homelessness or situational homelessness. That means that on any one day here in Lethbridge, we could have between 1,200 and 1,500 homeless individuals. Unfortunately, we tend to just focus on those who live on the street, and that is where the title "The Homeless" comes from. We have taken a very large community of roughly 1,500 people and distilled it down to the 70 or the 80 that we see on a daily basis, and that's incredibly problematic.
According to Stats Canada, in 2023, more than 118,000 people experienced homelessness in an emergency shelter, compared to less than 106,000 in 2022. Much of central Alberta is under a snowfall warning as the area is expected to receive a winter wallop. Environment Canada says some areas could see as much as 30 centimeters of snow by Friday morning, with periods of flurries lasting through Friday. Now, here in southern Alberta, although we've had some nice spring-like conditions lately, don't put those winter clothes away just yet, because we could see some white stuff headed our way. A chance of showers or flurries tonight and more flurries Friday. I'll be right back with the 7-day and national forecast. Oh, just when we thought spring was here to stay, you might want to pull out those snow shovels, because we are going to see more white than green in the coming days. So we're seeing this evening a 60% chance of showers or flurries, and then by Friday, turning to 60% chance of flurries. And we're going to drop from 17 degrees today down to 1 degree on a Friday. Into Saturday, also seeing that 60% chance of flurries. Tapering off by Saturday evening, though, also in the minuses there on the weekend. -2 for the high on a Saturday, climbing up to 4, though, on Sunday, and we should see some sunshine then. And then we got some 9s coming at us on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So the whole week, they're still remaining in those seasonal norms, actually. So average high for this time of year, 9 degrees. Average low, -4. Really, Thursday, today was the only day we were above that for the next 7 days. Record highs on this day was back in 2015, and it was 21 degrees, and the record low for this day was -28. That happened back in 1914. Sun rose this morning at 7:19, and our sun set this evening at 7:55 p.m. We're seeing 12 hours, 36 minutes of daylight. Okay, on the west coast tomorrow, some rain. We're looking at 30% chance of showers in Victoria, high of 12 degrees, 10 for the high in Vancouver, a 60% chance of showers. Now, central Alberta seeing a snowfall warning in effect. Could see some areas 10 to 20 centimeters and possibly even 30 centimeters by Friday morning. In Edmonton itself, though, 5 to 10 centimeters tonight and another 2 centimeters tomorrow, -4 for the high. Periods of snow tomorrow expected in Calgary with a high of -3. Now in Saskatchewan, particularly southern Saskatchewan, we're seeing a wintry mix of precipitation there. This evening in Saskatoon could see a mix of heavy snow, about accumulating 2 centimeters, and also mixed with blowing snow. And then by tomorrow, we're seeing periods of light snow, -7 for the high there on Friday. -5 expected in Regina on Friday, also periods of light snow. Also a winter storm warning or snowfall warning expected in Manitoba. Winnipeg itself could see 5 to 10 centimeters tonight and another 15 centimeters dumped tomorrow, -2 for the high. So lots of snow across the prairies as we get into the central part of the country. Not as much snow. We are seeing some showers expected in Toronto tomorrow, high of 4 degrees. High of 2 in Ottawa and 3 expected in Montreal, with a mix of sun and cloud in those cities. As we look to the east coast here, the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, 6 for the high expected in Fredericton. We're seeing flurries, and then later in the day could see showers mixed with flurries. Same thing for Halifax, seeing showers there, high of 6 degrees. 5 of the expected high in Charlottetown, could see periods of rain, and high of 2 degrees in St. John's, also looking at flurries there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturing Association says U.S. President Donald Trump risks essentially shutting down the industry with his latest tariffs. Flavio Volpe says the 25% tariffs on auto imports to the U.S. that are set to start next week will cost many Americans their job. The North American auto industry is highly integrated, meaning auto parts can cross the border several times before they become part of a finished vehicle. The White House says automobiles imported under the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement will only be tariffed on the value of the content, not made in the U.S. Well, DNA testing from 23andMe has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States. Privacy watchdogs are urging users of the popular service to delete their genetic data from the site as the company looks to sell its DNA database. However, according to Sharon Polsky with the Privacy and Access Council of Canada, even if you can delete your data, she says you should expect your information will still go to another company.
It's probably not just 23andMe holding company and its assets, which of course the assets include the DNA samples from however many millions of people. They also have a telehealth division, Lemonade, which is prescription information, it's health information. They have business agreements with pharmaceutical companies. It's hard to know what part of information is going to who and who's keeping it. We don't know. It's all very, very fuzzy. Expect that your information is going to another company.
The company's privacy policy allows for sale or transfer of the personal information in the event of a bankruptcy. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was even today at 25,161. The Dow was down 155 points to 42,299. The S&P 500 was down 18 points to 5,693. And the Nasdaq was down 94 points to 17,804. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 25 cents to $69.90 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $3.92 US. Gold was up 34.98 to $30.5635 US an ounce, and silver was up 74 cents to $33.39 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.65 per bushel, barley is at $6.64, canola is at $13.40, and corn is at $8 per bushel. Live cattle April contract was up $2.47 to $209.55. Feeder cattle were up 85 cents to $287.65, and lean hogs April contract was down 52 cents to $87.02. And the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at $69.90 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, half a week on the campaign trail, Liberal leader Mark Carney stopped campaigning to head to Ottawa to call a meeting of the candidate U.S. Cabinet Committee. They met to discuss U.S. President Donald Trump's automotive tariffs. Trump's 25% tariffs on all automobile imports to the U.S. begin next week, and the president has since threatened Canada and the European Union with even stiffer tariffs if they work together to do economic harm to America. With U.S. tariffs impacting the Canadian economy, provinces are now considering what they can do to help interprovincial free trade. BCN speaks with Trevor Toome, Director of Fiscal and Economic Policy with the School of Public Policy, who says billions of dollars could be added to our economy if trade barriers between provinces were removed. That is coming up right after the break. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews.
Canada and numerous other nations are up in arms over the U.S. tariffs, and out of that, the topic of doing away with interprovincial trade barriers is now a hot topic. What are these barriers and should they be removed? Joining us from Calgary to shed some light on this is Dr. Trevor Toome. He is a professor at the University of Calgary's Department of Economics and the Director of Fiscal and Economic Policy at the School of Public Policy. Trevor, it's great to have you back with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, let's get started. What exactly are interprovincial trade barriers, and what kinds of things are we talking about here?
Well, unlike international trade costs like tariffs and quotas, things that are, of course, we're seeing a lot more of between countries around the world, interprovincial trade barriers don't take the form of these kind of explicit taxes on trade. What they are, at the end of the day, are just differences in the rules of the game between one province and another. So regulations, standards, certifications, credentials are typically different from one province to another. And so if you're a business trying to buy or sell from another supplier located elsewhere in Canada, you might not be able to without simultaneously complying with both the rules that you're subject to in one province and the rules that prevail in another. Or if you're trying to operate across provincial boundaries, you might have to incur additional costs to try and simultaneously comply with those different rules and regulations. So a nice concrete example would be thinking about trucking regulations. What type of tires, times of day restrictions, hours worked, weight per axle varies from one province to the next. And so if you're a trucker moving through multiple provinces, you have to either reconfigure before moving into another one or kind of weight yourself lower than you otherwise would to comply with the lowest common denominator across your route. And so that adds costs to basically anything that we ship, in that case, by truck.
So then would it be fair to say that most Canadians are unaware of all these different trade barriers and also unaware of the economic impacts this has? Because it sounds like this could actually drive up costs.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair, that it's something where many Canadians are not aware of the barriers. A lot of attention is paid, for example, to beer and wine, and there are restrictions on your ability to trade in those items because each province has their own separate wholesaler that sometimes does bias its procurement to local suppliers. And so beer and wine gets a lot of attention, but that's just a small sliver of the total trade that we do. And these rules being different, as you note, it adds costs to businesses complying with those different rules and regulations. Or maybe you'll have productive firms in one province not bothering to enter markets elsewhere in Canada because of the need to comply with different rules and regulations. And so that does increase prices. It's tough to say by precisely how much. So I've done some research on this over the years, and there are some different methods and data issues, but roughly speaking, the internal trade costs add somewhere between 5 to 15% to prices. And so think about that as multiples of the GST, but it's hidden and embedded within the price of the items that we purchase. And the economic benefits of eliminating these barriers can also be quite substantial, potentially as high as 8% added to the overall productivity of the Canadian economy. And so that's quite a bit. 8% might sound small, but that's 8% of a $3.1 trillion economy. And so what we're really talking about here is potentially $250 billion per year in economic activity if we were to have fully liberalized interprovincial trade in Canada.
So this is like a form of protectionism for each province, but what do the stats say on this, and is it actually beneficial in some ways to individual provinces? Because it sounds like we could do away with these and save some money, but is that really going to be, is that going to be safe?
That's a great question. So the gains available from internal trade liberalization are found in every province. And so it's not as though the barriers benefit some and harm others. It kind of lowers productivity nationally. And interestingly, it tends to lower productivity and harm economic growth the most in smaller, lower income provinces like the Atlantic provinces in Canada. And so internal liberalization increases both the total size of Canada's economy and reduces inequality across locations within the country. But there, like any policy, there are winners and losers within an economy. So for example, think about trade and services and professional credentials. There's hundreds and hundreds of province-specific regulatory bodies that are responsible for issuing licenses to individuals to practice in a province. If we were to ease the barriers, maybe harmonize across provinces, or recognize as valid the credentials from other locations, that would weaken the independent authority of some of these local regulatory bodies. And so some might resist internal trade liberalization because it does weaken that kind of independent local autonomy and independence. And where one comes down on that, I guess, depends on what sector you're in. Some of the barriers could potentially increase the wages and salaries of certain professionals in certain provinces because it's creating this barrier to having others from elsewhere either move in or sell their services. But writ large, the economies of all provinces and the country as a whole are smaller because of these costs.
Right, because these trade barriers, they're not just affecting goods and maybe some services, but they're also affecting professionals as well. Because I know there's a lot of frustration with interprovincial regulations when it comes to medical professionals. Like, why can't a nurse from Alberta just move to BC and work in a hospital without having to jump through all these hoops? Because I don't think sickness should really really behaves differently in other provinces, and isn't Canada fairly consistent with the healthcare services it offers, province by province?
Yeah, that's the right question. Like, why do we have these local barriers to, in this case, the free mobility of Canadians as well? And then that's largely, something that is not, I think it's fair to say, explicitly designed to try and inhibit the ability of Canadians to move. But we set up our country as a fairly decentralized one. Provinces are responsible for a lot and have regulatory authority in a lot of different areas, and are hesitant to give up some of that authority. Whereas internal trade liberalization, if we think about what really might move the needle here, would be something that Nova Scotia's Premier Tim Houston put on the table in an act that's working their way through the legislature there right now that effectively says if a product complies with the rules and regulations, say health and safety standards of another province, then it is automatically deemed acceptable in Nova Scotia, even if it doesn't technically abide by Nova Scotia's rules and regulations. And they also have, within the Act, it will require that these licensing bodies within the province recognize as perfectly valid, without any additional requirements or testing or anything else, credentials issued by other provinces. And so that's a big move. Now, the trick for Nova Scotia is it's only going to apply for provinces that reciprocate, and we'll see who takes them up on that offer. So they want to try and encourage the free flow of goods and services, and it's that kind of policy that I guess we'll see if other provinces take them up on that, but it would be something that hopefully many others do, including Alberta.
Because yeah, that could be a slippery slope if you're getting grandfathered into a province that doesn't maybe have like a higher standard or a lower standard. Could this be a slippery slope?
Yeah, so that is a concern raised by some. Now, there is some degree of trust that we have to have in jurisdictions across Canada, that a province enacting rules and regulations in different areas would be enacting them in good faith, trying to ensure the health and safety of their own citizens, and deferring to their regulations as valid. Again, requires a little bit of that trust. Now, I tend not to put a lot of weight in the concern that it would lead to, say, a race to the bottom, who can weaken regulations the most, because at the end of the day, provincial governments are accountable to voters within the province, and I think it's fair to say most Canadians right across the country do want to have sensible rules and regulations where appropriate, but differences between provinces are often just kind of arrived at randomly. You have provinces adopting one set of rules, another province adopting a different set of rules, not for fundamentally different, reasons. Sometimes there's just no single objective correct rule or regulation, and we just adopt different ones. And they might even differ just ever so slightly, but there's going to be inspections and forms and things like this that adds to costs. So I think this kind of recognition of each other's rules and regulations is something that we should explore, and I suspect wouldn't lead to a race to the bottom.
And we have like thousands of different barriers from industry to industry and province to province that just add up too. Like, can these barriers be taken down, or does it need to be done piece by piece, which might take forever? Or is there some kind of like bulldozer approach that the provinces just could work out and just get the bulk of it done at once?
So historically, we do it piece by piece. Most recently, so back in 2017, there was a pretty big agreement that provinces reached called the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. And this is like a free trade agreement between countries, but this is between provinces. And the key thing that agreement did was set up ways of negotiating and harmonizing rules and regulations. An early win, for just an example, was first aid kits. What was required to be in first aid kits on, say, work sites was different from one province to the next. And that meant a company would need to source different first aid kits rather than bulk buying one type and then using that in its operations everywhere. It had to have different first aid kits for every single province. And so provinces came together and agreed to a single common set of rules around those first aid kits. So mentally multiply that by hundreds of thousands, and then you have a sense of the scale of the challenge. Doing it one by one is quite slow. And so a way to bulldoze through it would be to have a kind of a blanket policy where we say, if you're compliant with the rules of another province, then you're automatically allowable in our province, say. And something where it's just across the board recognition of regulations, credentials, standards, everything of other provinces. Now, no one's done that yet. Nova Scotia's getting the closest to that, and it'll be interesting to watch, especially with renewed attention on internal trade in the face of a less certain trading relationship with the United States.
Now, could this and should interprovincial trade barriers be a federal election issue?
Well, it's a good question, and I think it already is. The leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, has already released one piece of their platform concerning internal trade, effectively suggesting that the federal government could provide an incentive for provinces to move to a greater extent on internal trade by giving them a special financial transfer that would be larger for provinces that move more on internal trade liberalization. So providing a carrot, if you will. The federal government, other than providing financial resources, is quite limited on what it can do on internal trade because provinces are responsible for areas within their jurisdiction, and the federal government doesn't have the power to kind of step into provincial areas of jurisdiction and require they change behavior. So it's proposals like what Poilievre put forward, providing incentives, that can help move the needle, I think.
And then any thoughts on whether the American tariffs will be temporary or long-term, and to what degree would lowering interprovincial trade barriers offset the impact of U.S. tariffs?
Well, I am certainly not going to presume to know what is in the mind of President Trump when it comes to their plans for tariffs. But some in the administration do view tariffs in the United States as helping to achieve a couple of objectives, such as increasing manufacturing activity in the United States, but also generating revenue that can be used to lower income taxes in the United States. And so if that's the goal, then tariffs might be a longer-term policy development in the United States, not just a kind of short-term negotiating tactic. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how things develop. But if tariffs are permanent, then internal trade liberalization is a way to help offset the economic damage that would come with tariffs between Canada and the United States. So for context, the Bank of Canada estimates that Canada's economy might shrink by about 4% in response to a Canada-US trade war with tariffs on the order of 25%. And that's significant. So it would lead to a recession, probably one that would last about 2 years. But compare that 4% cost to the potential for gains from internal trade liberalization, as I mentioned, of about 8%. So it's possible that the gains from internal trade, if they're deep and broad and full, could exceed the costs associated with the Canada-US trade war. And I think that's why governments are rightly talking more about internal trade policies and trying to move on that front, because it is one of these sources of economic benefit. But it would take time. There's no avoiding a short-term disruption if there is a trade war between Canada and the United States. But the gains of internal trade could potentially be bigger.
Dr. Trevor Tombe is a professor at the University of Calgary's Department of Economics and the Director of Fiscal and Economic Policy at the School of Public Policy. Trevor, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Rodeo is a fascinating sport to watch, but it can also be a dangerous sport. And what's it all about? Is it something you should get your kids involved in? Joining us from Lethbridge County is accomplished rodeo athlete Rayleigh Edwards. Rayleigh was the Canadian Professional Rodeo Association's 2003 Ladies Barrel Racing Champion, and she qualified to the Canadian Finals Rodeo 11 times in her career. She was the youngest ever CFR qualifier and also competed for Team Canada in the 1988 Olympics. So great to have you with us, Rayleigh.
Thanks for having me.
Wow. Well, when did you first get started in rodeo, and what was it that sparked your love for the sport?
Yes, so I grew up in it. My parents both rodeoed. My dad was a Canadian champion calf roper. My mom, Canadian champion barrel racer. And so my sister and I, we basically grew up in the sport and around the sport and just followed suit. And I started at a very young age. And then qualified for the CFR at 9 years old, so quite young. I've been at it for quite some time.
Yeah, and I know when I was lining up this interview as well, I chatted with Dwayne Kessler. Again, you see that in the family, right? Runs in the family, runs in your family. Yeah. I love to see that. I mean, at what age, I guess, should youngsters start training and competing? I mean, how early?
There isn't really a right or wrong answer to that. To be quite honest, for me, I grew up in it, so I was immersed in it from the get-go, where some people might not have grow up in anything in an environment like that, and they would just have a love for animals even, and that might trigger them to want to do it. So there's, all stages that you can start this process at, I guess, basically is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah, sure. I mean, somebody could start, maybe it's a late start, but if they're 11 or 12, I mean, they could start, right? Others start like, 7 years old, right?
yeah, 11, 12. There's a lot of opportunities. There's high school rodeos, junior high school rodeos, and I believe grade 5 is they seem to keep expanding the starting point for the junior high. So they have different events that obviously aren't going to be like your main, like saddle bronc riding, all of those things. So they'll be equivalent to the age or like age appropriate. But grade 5 to grade 8 is junior high, and then grades 9 through 12 is high school rodeo. So my daughter actually high school rodeos, but she plays volleyball as well. So she kind of is getting her experience in all kinds of different things, and rodeo is a little she can dabble in it a bit yet.
Wow. Okay. And
Yeah.
and how long are you now? I think you're still competing, aren't you?
I am. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
yes.
And you're
Not
like, what,
full-time,
29,
but-
something like that? So, been at it for a while. Hey, does part of the love of rodeo come from the social interaction? I mean, every time I go to a rodeo, there's just a ton of community events that kind of knit people together.
Absolutely. You travel to all of these rodeos and often, travel with another person at the same time, like a traveling partner. You develop friendships for sure. And you're in a circuit. So you're traveling all to the same place, like different locations through the whole summer, through the whole winter, whichever. So yeah, you really do get to know these people, your competitors, your fellow competitors very well. And so it is definitely a very tight-knit group. If somebody's down, they'll help you out, or vice versa.
Yeah, I see that a lot where it's, it's not like it's necessarily a nasty competition, but actually you're helping each other out. You all have a love for the same thing, and of course you're competitive, but yeah, I mean, it's so good to see that. Tell us a bit about barrel racing. I mean, how do you train for something like that particular sport? And I'm guessing there are some particular physical demands on your body when you're barrel racing, or if you're riding a bucking bronc for that matter as well.
Yeah, totally different. Yeah, different events require different preparation. For myself, probably don't want to get too, I want to be strong. As far as for the competitor myself, core strength, things like that are really important. And then my horse's condition needs to be very well, they need to be in very good shape as well. So if we treat each of ourselves, my partner, my horse, and myself as an athlete, then you're headed in the right direction. But different events will require different, you just want to be fit.
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, because sometimes I think people go like, "Oh, it's a rodeo." I mean, are they really athletes? Oh, yeah. I'm going. If you ever tried doing what they're doing, you'll find out pretty quick. I mean, even with barrel racing, I know it's not bull riding, but man, you see the angle that horse is at. Man, that is
have good balance.
Crazy.
Yes, good balance and timing. For example, if my husband doesn't ride, but if he does, he'll be so stiff for a couple days afterwards.
Oh yeah, I believe it. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
do you ever get tired of the constant travel, the demands that come with that? Because you're always on the road, it seems, right? And of course, there's expenses that come along with that.
Absolutely. So currently, I am not going super full time, and I guess when you have a horse that allows you to go and kind of pays the way, then when you're winning, it's kind of pretty easy to keep going. And if you're trying to get one ready, you might not go as much just because, for a lot of travel. I have, as being a mom, I have a lot of other responsibilities too. So yeah, I guess you can totally get burnt out. But I do love it. So when the right horse comes along, I'll probably be hitting the trail. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, it's probably similar to hockey moms, right? You're always on the road, carting your kids around, and it's similar with this, but there's just such a love and a passion for the sport. So, bull riding, often the highlight of a rodeo, right? Who's winning, the cowboys or the bulls, right? I mean, it's just so crazy and dangerous, these powerful, huge animals. So I know you've got to stay on at least 8 seconds. I know that much about rodeo, but what else do the riders riders have to do in order to earn some points?
So part of the score comes, 50% of the score comes from the animal and 50 from the rider. So if the bull performs well and you stay on, they're going to come up with a lot of the points, and then you're hopefully going to match on the other side in order to get that high score. So
Right. Now, do they have to do spurring, that sort of thing? Or are there?
yeah, like if you can show that you're in control. And the other thing, like the difficulty of the animal, the degree of difficulty that the animal is will often increase your chance to have a high score. They'll score high. So if you can do your job and either spur, show that you're in control, stay on.
Yeah.
That's a
Well, yeah.
bonus.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, with bull riding, especially, not everybody stays on for 8 seconds. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's a judged event, so that's the discretion of the judge is what's going to what catches their eye. Barrel racing is a timed event.
It's a little bit like figure skating.
Right. So what you think is really awesome, I might think is pretty good.
Only a little more violent and a little more dangerous, And again, maybe the luck of the draw plays a big part in that, sounds like, too. So, I mean, one of the concerns we hear about as well is the welfare of the animals in rodeo sports. Although, and anytime I'm talking to somebody on rodeo, they just seem to love the animals. Yet, of course, we do see some injuries. So the rules, they have changed over the years, haven't they, to prevent injuries?
Absolutely. So there's different things that have been implemented in order to maintain the safety of all the animals. But they are our livelihood. The stock contractors, these animals are their livelihood. And so you can guarantee that all the care that is needed will go into each of those animals. And so they're very well taken care of. Like my horse probably gets a lot more care than I would give myself, to be quite honest. So.
Well, we should maybe touch base on the safety risks to rodeo athletes themselves. What are the, I guess, most common injuries you see, and is there anything you can do to keep those injuries to a minimum?
Like for my particular event, there's not often a lower risk for the competitor. I mean, everything comes with risk, but for the most part, my event is fairly low risk. Your steer wrestlers, they're going to have knee troubles, possibly. But for the most part, if they're fit and technique is right, they should be okay. Freak things happen though. Your bareback riders, they're wedged in there. If there's a hang up, there could be,
you get jammed against like the bars sort of thing, or if you maybe get a concussion by landing on your head sort of thing?
I was going to say there's a lot of concussion situations with bull riding, head-to-head contact or just hitting the ground right or wrong, mostly wrong. But yeah, so there is a lot of risk. Getting stepped on.
This doesn't sound fun.
The rough stuff.
Can you explain a bit about what breakaway roping and calf roping are all about?
You bet. So the difference between the two. So the breakaway roping is a women's event that is really catching steam. It's extremely popular. And actually, for the first time, it'll be the Calgary Stampede this year. So that's awesome. It's in a lot of rodeos already. And there is a little string that's tied onto the end of the rope to the horn. And so you have to have a bell collar. It has to go around the neck. It can't have a leg or anything like that into the loop. And it just breaks off the horn really easy. And so then as soon as it breaks off, the time stops. So it's really cool. And then calf roping, you catch and then you have to tie down. So it replicates, old times and what has to be done if you're working on a ranch or whatever.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So,
well, years ago in a media event, I think it was called calf dressing. You had to get you had to put a sack on the back of the calf's legs or something like that. And I learned firsthand going, this isn't as easy as it looks.
No. You don't wear pants often.
Yeah. So, hey, what do riders need to do to earn points? Now, let's say saddle bronc and also bareback riding. Again, that's having to do with how you spur and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, correct. So the bareback riding obviously is a different setup as for how the competitor is on the horse. So there's it's a riggin, and it's like a suitcase handle that their hand will go into. And so then saddle bronc riding obviously has a saddle, no horn in the saddle. It's an association tree, they call it. But both events, you're going to have to mark the horse out, which means that very first jump that the animal takes out of the chute, and when their feet hit the ground, the rider's feet have to be forward and at the point of the shoulder and still there when they take that first jump. And they can't pull those feet back and knee up to stay on. They have to have them forward for a proper mark out, and then on they go. So
all right, that's interesting. Yeah, bareback. I'm going like, man, how do they stay on those things? But so let me ask you, how long do you think you'll keep competing? When do competitors know it's time to hang up the spurs?
Maybe not compete at a high level, possibly forever.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a lot of people that are still going that I've competed with, that I've grown up competing with, and that are still going and extremely competitive. And they're in their 70s. So honestly, if you have
wow,
there's no time limit.
Okay.
As long as you're capable of doing it. And so
Okay.
I tend to do this for as long as possible.
All right, good for you. Any final advice for viewers considering getting involved in the sport, getting their kids involved in the sport, that sort of thing?
Yeah, you know what? If your kid is interested in this and they don't have to go to a high level, they can just enjoy animals. But I think when your kids learn the responsibilities of taking care of an animal and everything like that, you're doing them a really good service, because I think it's a great life.
All right, just a good all-round experience. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story with us here today, Rayleigh.
Thank you.
Well, appreciate it. Rayleigh Edwards, a champion rodeo athlete from right here in southern Alberta. I'm Paul Arthur. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.